Hey guys, tonight we're heading deep into the candlelit corridors of ancient power where emperors rule not with logic, but with the chaotic flair of a midnight fever dream. You're about to dine beside a horse, receive battle orders against the sea, and maybe catch a flying dinner plate if you blink at the wrong moment. Welcome to the twisted sleepover of history's most unhinged rulers. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you're still awake by the end, drop your location and local time in the comments. I'd love to see how far this rabbit hole travels. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You shuffle slowly into the palace of Gaius Julius Caesar Augustus Germanicus, thankfully known by the much shorter nickname Caligula. The name means little boots, but tonight there's nothing little about the madness in the air. His marble floors gleam with unnatural polish, and the guards lining the corridor. They glance at you not with suspicion, but pity. Caligula's first few months as emperor weren't completely off the rails. In fact, many Romans thought he was a godsend after the gruff years of Tiberius. But then came the fever, a brutal near-death illness. And when Caligula woke up, something in him had snapped. You step through velvet curtains into the main hall, and it feels less like a throne room and more like a play already in motion. There's a man in armor shouting at a giant seashell centerpiece. That's Caligula, and he's yelling at Neptune, god of the sea, because he's declared war on the ocean. He once marched his entire army to the shore of Gaul and commanded them to stab the waves. You almost slip on a seashell yourself left behind from that military victory. His soldiers reportedly collected them as spoils of war. Historians still argue whether this event was a literal stunt or a staged joke meant to humiliate his generals. But Caligula wasn't exactly known for his subtle wit. You glance toward the other end of the hall and freeze. There's a marble chair covered in silk. And sitting on it, no joke, is a horse. Incitatus. That's the name of Caligula's favorite animal. He built it a marble stable, fed it oats mixed with gold flakes, and allegedly planned to make it a consul, a top political office in Rome. Some say this was Caligula's way of mocking the Roman Senate. Others, they think he genuinely believed the horse was better than most senators. And you know what? The more you watch that horse just calmly sit there, not demanding bribes or plotting betrayal, he might have had a point. The air in the room tightens. Caligula is staring at you now. His eyes are too wide, too bright, like a child on the brink of a tantrum or revelation. He's draped in a glittering robe of gold thread, barefoot, and muttering something about being Jupiter in the flesh. His guards don't flinch when he refers to himself as a god. In fact, you're beginning to realize no one here blinks at anything anymore. That's how you survive. A mad emperor, you nod, you applaud. You accept that reality now includes divine horses and oceanic warfare. You notice a slave girl nearby, with one eye twitching rapidly. She's been standing still for what must be hours. Behind her is a statue, only it's not a statue. It's a man painted white, standing on one foot. Performance art punishment. In Caligula's court, the line doesn't exist. You pass through another curtain into the garden atrium. Once it must have been peaceful, but now it's rigged with speakers while their version, hidden flutists playing eerie slow notes. Caligula likes to wander here at night, wrapped in a star-patterned cloak, mumbling to the moon. He once ordered his soldiers to build a floating bridge 2 miles long across the Bay of Baiae, just so he could ride his horse across it. Twice. Why historians suggest he did it to mock a prophecy that he had no more chance of becoming emperor than of riding a horse across the bay. So naturally, he built the bridge, proved the prophecy wrong, and nearly bankrupted the empire doing it. In another courtyard, you find a garden filled with statues. But not just any statues. These are marble versions of Roman gods, with their heads removed and replaced by busts of Caligula himself. Jupiter, Caligula's face. Mars, also Caligula. He even tried to move a sacred statue of Zeus from Olympia to Rome, just to put his own head on it. The Greeks said no. A rare collective? Absolutely not. Quirky detail you overhear from a nervous scribe hiding behind a column. Caligula once invited a man to dinner, then laughed in his face. When asked why, he whispered, "I could have you executed right now." Ha! Dinner and dread Roman style. But was he truly insane? Or just an expert at weaponized unpredictability? Historians still argue whether Caligula's behavior was the result of trauma illness or pure political theater. His reign was short, just 4 years. But in that time, he turned the empire into something that felt more like a surrealist play than a government. A creak behind you. It's a servant delivering a plate of figs. Caligula once poisoned figs in his personal orchard to test his food tasters. You politely decline. Somewhere deep in the palace, a low rumble echoes either thunder or a particularly ill-timed chariot crash. Time to move on. As you exit through another absurdly tall, gold-plated doorway, you pass a fresco of Caligula ascending into the heavens surrounded by cherubs. One of them has the face of his horse. And yet even as your sandals clack against the cool stone floors, you wonder, was this really madness? Or was it what happens when no one can ever say no again? You don't get far before the smoke finds you. Thick black and laced with the faint tang of burning citrus oil. You cough lightly, pulling your sleeve over your nose, but it doesn't help. Rome is on fire. Not metaphorically. You're standing on a hillside, overlooking the city as it smolders like some oversized incense burner. Orange embers flicker across rooftops. Whole neighborhoods vanish beneath flames. And up above it all, looming like a god who forgot he's mortal, is Emperor Nero strumming a lyre. Well, maybe. Historians still argue whether Nero actually fiddled while Rome burned. For one thing, fiddles didn't exist yet. For another, he may not have even been in Rome when the fire started. But here's what you do know. Nero took full advantage of the disaster. And you're about to watch him turn tragedy into an architectural fever dream. You trudge toward the Palatine Hill past streets littered with overturned wagons and the melted remains of shop signs. The people aren't screaming anymore. Most have fled. In the distance, you spot a sculpture half collapsed, the head of some forgotten senator lying upside down in a fountain. And there at the summit is Nero's new obsession, the Domus Aurea. The Golden House, his pet project, his legacy. It's not finished yet. Technically, construction started right after the fire. Coincidence, hard to say. What matters is that Nero saw burnt Rome and thought, you know what this needs? A 100-acre pleasure palace with rotating dining rooms and a lake in the middle. You step onto imported marble that still smells faintly of volcanic ash. A hallway opens before you, long and curved, lined with inlays of ivory seashells and tiny mirrors. As you walk, the light shifts unnaturally, bouncing off the walls until you feel like you're inside a jewelry box, if that jewelry box was also full of statues of naked gods that look suspiciously like Nero himself. The scent of roses hits you next, overpowering, dizzying. Nero adored automatic scent machines. Little ceiling panels would open mid-banquet to shower guests with petals. Quirky detail. One night, the mechanism got stuck, and a guest was allegedly smothered to death under a foot of perfumed blossoms. Smells like luxury. A low hum of music echoes ahead. Not soldiers, not advisors, musicians. Nero fancied himself an artist above all else. Emperor second, if at all. He sang, he acted, he wrote poetry, and he demanded an audience. You pass a painted wall depicting the emperor in full tragic mask regalia, weeping for a heroine he just played. One time, Nero performed a 5-hour musical number. Anyone who left before it ended was considered treasonous. Some accounts claim women gave birth during the concert rather than walk out. Others say nobles faked sudden deaths to escape. Tonight, you're lucky he's merely rehearsing. You find him at the center of an amphitheater built just for him, surrounded by marble benches and artificial stars overhead. Nero stands in a flowing silk tunic, eyes closed, fingers plucking at a golden lyre with slow, deliberate drama. He's singing a Greek lamentation badly, but everyone within earshot is pretending it's divine. He opens his eyes and spots you. You, he says, voice thin and slightly nasal. Tell me, did you feel the music or merely hear it? You freeze. Choose wisely. I felt it, you whisper, like fire across my skin. He beams. Exactly. This perhaps is Nero's madness, a desperate, aching hunger to be adored, not as a ruler, but as a performer. The stage, not the throne, is his real domain, and he doesn't tolerate critics. In his private theater, statues applaud on command. Servants sprinkle saffron mist through vents. And in the corner, a scribe is dutifully recording his every word, for posterity editing out the bad notes as he goes. But make no mistake, Nero can be deadly. You pass through a side door into a gallery of busts, all of them women, all of them once part of Nero's life. His mother Agrippina is there, her expression frozen somewhere between pride and horror. She was once his greatest supporter. She may have even arranged for Emperor Claudius to die just to put Nero on the throne. But as her influence grew, so did Nero's paranoia. Eventually, he had her murdered after failing to kill her with a collapsible boat. No joke. He built a boat that fell apart mid-sea. She swam back to shore, so he gave up and ordered her stabbed. Historians still debate how much of the story is truth versus juicy Roman gossip. But her death was real. So were the deaths of his wife, his stepbrother, and anyone else who questioned his divinity. Even the Senate grew terrified. At one point, he declared himself the new Apollo. He built giant bronze statues in his own image, demanded worship, and tried to rename Rome after himself, Neropolis. You walk through one more chamber, circular domed, still echoing with the rustle of construction. This, they say, is the rotating dining room. Mounted on a central pivot moved by slaves and ball bearings, it would spin gently while guests dined beneath a ceiling painted with celestial bodies. Outside, the night is cooler now. The fires have moved on to other districts, but the city still smolders in the distance. Nero's palace shines unnaturally, an oasis of self-indulgence in a world of soot. He had a chance to lead Rome through one of its darkest hours. Instead, he chose to rebuild it as a monument to himself. Was he mad? Historians can't agree. Some say he was simply a spoiled narcissist. Others argue he was a product of years of trauma manipulation and unchecked power. You leave the Golden House through a gilded hallway, your reflection warped in its mirrored walls. Behind you, the emperor's voice rises again in song. It trembles, it cracks, but no one dares cover their ears. Because here in Nero's Rome, it's better to be tone-deaf than dead. You barely make it down the hill before the ground starts to tremble, not with an earthquake, but with the heavy pounding of feet. Not soldiers, gladiators. Dust swirls up around the arena walls as you approach the Colosseum, or at least what will eventually become it. For now, it's a different venue entirely. A makeshift amphitheater drenched in sweat and spilled wine and echoing with the primal roar of thousands. Tonight's main event, the emperor himself. Because Commodus doesn't just watch gladiator fights, he stars in them. You nudge your way through the crowd, trying not to make eye contact with the man selling roasted dormice on sticks. The air is thick with perfume and bloodlust. Everyone's here, senators, soldiers, street kids. Some came for sport. Some came to flatter the emperor with applause. Most just want to avoid getting executed for yawning. In the center of the arena stands a man, with lion skin draped over one shoulder, golden curls bouncing as he turns toward the crowd. Commodus, son of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king's heir. And yet, this guy, he's more showboat than statesman. He raises his arms. The people cheer. You join in loudly because Commodus is the kind of man who notices who doesn't clap. He wasn't always like this. Early in his reign, advisors kept him in check. But as time passed, he pushed them aside, one execution at a time. Now he rules alone and sees himself not as emperor, but as a god reborn. Hercules, to be exact. You spot the wooden club at his side, cartoonishly oversized. One time, he insisted on fighting naked, except for a lion pelt. No armor, just pure bravado and muscles greased with olive oil. A gladiator enters. This one is real scarred, cautious, and probably under strict orders not to win. Commodus grins and charges, his style wild and unpredictable. He once boasted of killing 100 lions in a single day. Historians still argue whether they were sedated first. Another time, he fought a man with a wooden sword, while Commodus used a steel blade. Quirky fact, he charged Rome a fee for every time he fought in the arena. Technically, he was paying himself from the public treasury. Being emperor and gladiator comes with perks. You move to the edge of the stands and nearly trip over a broken statue arm. It's one of the many Commodus had redone with his face. In his mind, he wasn't just Hercules reborn. He was every god, every myth, every savior Rome could ask for. He even tried to rename the months of the year after his titles. One month literally became Herculeus. Another Lucius, his own middle name. The Roman calendar went from functional to fan club. He even renamed Rome itself Colonia Commodiana, City of Commodus. Rolls right off the tongue. A senator near you is shaking. His old eyes sunken and lips trembling in a silent prayer. He's seen too many of these games. Probably lost friends to the emperor's whims. Commodus didn't like critics. He once executed a man for having better hair. Another time, he claimed a senator looked too bored and had him thrown to panthers. In the arena, the gladiator stumbles. Commodus is quick, too quick, and delivers a dramatic thrust. Blood splashes onto the sand. The crowd roars. Commodus raises his arms again, expecting more praise. You cheer reflexively, heart pounding. And just like that, it's over. The emperor tosses his weapon aside like a used prop and struts back toward the imperial box of sweat glistening on his forehead. A servant rushes out with a towel, another with grapes. You wonder how many of them used to be senators. That's the thing about Commodus. He didn't just want to rule Rome. He wanted to perform Rome. Turn it into a living stage for his fantasies. One time, he ordered the city's most disabled citizens to dress as mythical monsters so he could slay them in front of a crowd. That wasn't war. That wasn't sport. That was theater with a body count. And yet, for all the madness, there's a strange logic underneath. By becoming a gladiator, Commodus aligned himself with the masses. He gave them what they craved, bread, blood, and spectacle. While the elite scorned him, the people kind of loved it. But absolute power warps everything. You step behind the stands, into the stables, where the smell of hay mixes with dried blood. Here rumors grow like mold. You overhear a whisper the emperor's lover has been poisoned. Another voice adds, he killed his own sister. No proof, of course. But when people vanish in Commodus's Rome, no one asks too many questions. Historians still debate how dangerous he really was. Was he truly mad, or just drowning in his own myth-making? The surviving records are biased, written by the elite who hated him. But what's certain, Commodus ruled for 12 long years. That's not nothing. Your path leads toward the palace again. But this time, you pass a strange hallway lined with weapons. Swords, spears, tridents, all used by the emperor himself. Each labeled with an elaborate title, the Bull Slayer, Sword of Jupiter's Chosen Fang of Hercules. It's like walking through a warrior's trophy case, except every trophy is imaginary. Just before you leave, you glimpse a mural in progress. It shows Commodus standing over the world lions, bowing at his feet, senators kneeling behind them. Above his head, a ring of stars and his own face on the sun. And still part of you wonders, was he playing madman, or did he truly believe it all? You step out into the street as night falls. Somewhere behind you, the crowd is chanting his name. The ground trembles again, not from combat, but from applause. The air thickens with incense before you even arrive. Not the soft, comforting kind they've gone overboard here. It's eye-watering, cloying, and absolutely everywhere. You're not in Rome anymore. You're deep in the sun-drenched east, in the ancient city of Emesa, Syria, stepping into the strange scented court of Elagabalus. Technically, his name was Marcus Aurelius Antoninus, but nobody remembers that. Elagabalus is what stuck, borrowed from the god he worshipped, and tried to force upon an entire empire. You duck under a canopy of silk, your sandals already sinking slightly into rose petals scattered across the marble. A trumpet blares nearby. You flinch. No, it's just a procession. The emperor is arriving, with his god. You peer around a pillar and catch sight of a towering black stone being wheeled in on a golden chariot. That's not hyperbole. It's a meteorite jet-black egg-shaped and believed by Elagabalus to be the physical manifestation of his deity, El Gabal, the sun god of Emesa. And this god doesn't travel alone. The chariot is pulled by white horses and accompanied by flutists, dancers, and about 30 priests wearing eyeliner and no pants. You blink, hard. Elagabalus follows behind, radiant in gold robes, his face painted and glowing with oil. He's only a teenager, 14, maybe 15. But he walks like someone who believes thunder should clap with each footstep. That's the thing about this emperor. He didn't just rule Rome. He tried to reinvent it in the image of his god. And it didn't go over well. You shuffle along with the crowd into the palace's great hall. The ceilings soar, painted with zodiac symbols and tiny hand-hammered stars. In the center, an altar gleams with amber fire. This isn't just religious fervor, it's performance. Theater, a collision of Eastern mysticism and Roman tradition, and you're stuck right in the middle. The whispers start immediately. Elagabalus is planning another marriage. That would be marriage number 5. One of them was to a Vestal virgin, something so sacrilegious that even Rome, with its famously flexible morality, raised its collective eyebrow. Another time, he married a man. Twice. Then declared himself the wife. Or maybe the husband. Historians still argue which way the titles actually went. Tonight's dinner is already laid out. You find your seat next to a goat wearing a laurel crown and try to blend in. Servants glide through the room, placing dishes with unsettling smiles. Stuffed ostrich, jellyfish stew, flamingo tongues. And for dessert, a surprise. Always a surprise. A guest once found his plate covered in live bees. Another ashes and charcoal symbolic, apparently. You eye your own bowl suspiciously. It's soup, probably. At the head of the room, Elagabalus stands atop a low dais, hands lifted skyward. He's not addressing the room. He's addressing the sun. His god. His cosmic identity. He speaks in a language no one around you understands, ancient Emesene perhaps, and then pauses for dramatic effect. A slave triggers a hidden mechanism. The ceiling opens slightly, revealing the darkening sky. Quirky detail. Elagabalus once installed a device that released rose petals from the rafters during banquets. One time it malfunctioned and dropped so many flowers that a few guests nearly suffocated. Beauty in excess becomes a weapon. The emperor sits, well lounges. And now the real spectacle begins. This isn't just a meal, it's a moving theater. Dancers twirl in elaborate sunburst costumes, musicians play strange Eastern instruments, and a pair of trained leopards stroll past the tables wearing tiny gold harnesses. One snarls at a senator. You pretend not to notice. All the while, Elagabalus watches amused. He's smeared with perfumes, some say he bathed in them daily, and his fingers are stacked with rings. He's also wearing more makeup than the performers. The Romans. They hate it. They hate the foreignness, the femininity, the sheer wrongness of it all. But they don't dare speak. That's the paradox of Elagabalus. He was so shockingly different from the Roman ideal, young effeminate, obsessed with ritual and beauty that it short-circuited their understanding of power. He didn't march in triumph or give stoic speeches. He paraded in gowns. He offered sacrifices to a foreign sun god. He danced in public rituals wearing women's robes. And, perhaps most scandalously, he reportedly wanted gender reassignment surgery. He offered vast sums of gold to any physician who could help him be transformed. Historians still argue whether this makes him the first recorded transgender ruler in Western history, or whether the accounts are colored by anti-Eastern Roman prejudice. You sneak a glance at him now sipping from a jade cup. He looks content. Not manic like Caligula. Not cruel like Commodus. Just deeply, genuinely convinced that he is doing the right thing, that Rome should abandon Jupiter, Mars, and the old gods, and bow instead to the Blackstone on wheels. Outside, priests begin chanting. The sound is hypnotic, deep, rhythmic. You feel it in your chest, the kind of sound that could lull entire cities into obedience or chaos. As the meal ends, a servant offers you a napkin soaked in myrrh. Your head spins slightly from the incense and wine, or maybe from something more potent in your cup. The goat next to you burps. You're told the emperor plans to host a dawn ritual tomorrow. Something involving phoenix feathers, a gold-plated bull, and possibly human blood. You nod politely. It's best not to ask too many questions in this palace. You slip out through a side corridor, the stone cool against your fingertips. Behind you, laughter rises sharp, musical-edged with something you can't quite name. Maybe it's joy. Maybe it's madness. Or maybe it's just what happens when a teenager with unlimited power decides the entire empire should worship him in drag under the desert sun. It's quiet when you arrive, too quiet. You tread carefully down a long marble hallway, slick with condensation, your steps echoing off polished stone. The steam hits, next, hot, heavy, and faintly scented with mint. You're standing inside the famed baths of Caligula, one of Rome's great architectural marvels. Grand arches soar above, and mosaics glitter beneath shallow pools. You could almost forget where you are. Almost. Because even here, in a place built for peace and pleasure, there's a lingering tension. A silence thickened by the ghost of paranoia. These aren't just public baths, they're political. And the man behind them, Emperor Caligula, is watching everything. You slip into the shadow of a statue, its face damaged, but once a likeness of a god. Or maybe Caligula himself. He had a habit of blending the two. At first glance, his reign was marked by grand gestures. He extended Roman citizenship to almost every free man in the empire, something no emperor had done before. Historians still argue whether it was generosity or a tax move, probably both. But that's just one side of the coin. Flip it, and you find blood. A lot of it. Caligula didn't share power well. In fact, when he first became emperor, it was alongside his younger brother, Geta, for about 10 minutes. They tried to co-rule, keeping to separate wings of the palace and dividing government duties like kids forced to share a room. It didn't last. One afternoon, Caligula invited Geta to a peace meeting with their mother present to keep things civil. As Geta entered, guards ambushed him, stabbed him to death in their mother's arms. She screamed. Caligula just stood there. You wander through one of the caldariums, now the hot steam room, trying not to slip on the wet marble. Somewhere nearby, a guard clears his throat, then disappears behind a curtain. Even now, centuries later, you feel watched. That's the legacy Caligula left, fear stitched into stone. He didn't stop with Geta. After the murder, Caligula launched a purge so wide, it made previous purges look like clerical errors. Anyone even suspected of loyalty to his brother gone. Some say over 20,000 people were executed. Others argue the numbers exaggerated. Either way, the message was clear: absolute loyalty or else. And yet, outside these walls, he's remembered for those very baths you're walking through. They span acres. Massive columns rise like trees. The walls are lined with marble shipped from Egypt, Numidia, and Greece. Quirky detail. The aqueduct system had to be expanded just to keep the pools full. This wasn't just a bathhouse. It was a propaganda project, a love letter to Roman leisure built by a man who trusted no one. You lower yourself cautiously into a tepidarium, a warm soaking pool, and glance around. Everything feels serene except for the faint metallic tang in the air, like old coins or blood. There's a story. One day, a philosopher dared suggest that Geta might have made a good co-emperor. Just suggested it. Caligula ordered him skinned alive in front of his students. Another time, when visiting Alexandria, the local population mocked him with a satirical play. Caligula responded by inviting the city's leading citizens to a military parade, and then had them slaughtered in the streets. Even the soldiers feared him. But they followed him, and that was enough. Your path winds deeper into the bath complex now, into the frigidarium, the cold plunge. You pause at a statue of Hercules, well, sort of. The face is unmistakably Caligula's, down to the thick curls and tense jaw. He liked that comparison. Strong, heroic divine, but with a permanent scowl. Historians can't agree what drove him. Was it grief, guilt, pure power addiction? His mother, Julia Domna, tried to advise him, but after Getta's murder, their relationship frayed. She died not long after, some say, from cancer, others from heartbreak. Caracalla didn't mourn long. In fact, he barely stayed in Rome at all. He spent most of his reign on the road, dragging his court through the provinces, campaigning, inspecting troops, avoiding any room with too many mirrors. He adored the military, wore a soldier's uniform more than a toga, ate with the troops, marched with them, fought with them. That loyalty worked until it didn't. As you dry off and slip back into your sandals, you find a smaller hidden corridor. It leads away from the bath complex toward a quieter corner of the imperial estate. A fresco peels from the wall here, depicting a man on horseback, sword raised. It was painted during Caracalla's final campaign, a tour through the eastern provinces that ended in surprise, more blood. He planned to invade Parthia, but before he got the chance, he was assassinated. Not by a senator or a foreign enemy or even a discontented citizen. It was one of his own guards, a centurion named Justin Martialis, who waited for the perfect moment during a roadside stop. Caracalla had dismounted to relieve himself, yes, that kind of roadside stop when the blow came. Quick, clean, and final. The guard didn't live much longer. He was immediately cut down by Caracalla's bodyguards. But the deed was done. The emperor, feared and followed for years, was gone in an instant. You emerge from the corridor back into the evening air, the last hints of steam rising from the bathhouse behind you. The sky's turning violet. Cicadas hum softly. It feels peaceful again. But you know better. You've walked the halls. You've seen what lies beneath the warm waters and cool marble. Caracalla may have given Rome its grandest bathhouse, but he washed nothing clean. You step out into the golden hush of twilight, only to feel it the unmistakable sensation of being watched. Not just by people, by mirrors. They're everywhere. Some are large and mounted in silver frames. Others are small and set into the walls like eyes. You try not to catch your own reflection as you enter the private chambers of Emperor Domitian, the last of the Flavian emperors, and perhaps Rome's most paranoid interior decorator. The walls shimmer faintly. You realize it's not paint, it's polished obsidian imported at obscene cost. You're inside a palace wrapped in glossy black glass, built by a man who trusted no one and nothing except his ability to see an assassin before the blade hit his back. Domitian's Rome is not a loud Rome. It whispers. Even the guards posted along the corridor wear soft sandals and glance sideways before they breathe. You've heard of emperors who craved applause. Not this one. He preferred the silence between heartbeats, because that's when conspiracies moved. That's when danger struck. You pass through a narrow archway and find yourself in a room designed more like a trap than a throne room. There's no clear entrance or exit, just curtain after curtain and a scent of oil and lavender. In the center, under a canopy of shadow and gold thread, sits Domitian. He's not dressed in purple. He's in deep black, always was. He declared himself Dominus et Deus, Lord and God, and somehow managed to do it with a straight face. He doesn't speak as you enter, just watches. There's always the chance you're a dagger with legs. But here's the twist. Domitian wasn't all bad. Under his rule, Rome prospered. He stabilized the currency, rebuilt temples, improved provincial roads. Historians still argue whether he was a misunderstood micromanager or a full-blown control freak with God-complex seasoning. Possibly both. What made people fear him wasn't what he did publicly. It was what happened in the shadows. You wander into his private archives, a room no one is supposed to see. Scrolls stacked by topic, senators, loyalty reports, slaves suspected, whispers wives' eyes too sharp. A note pinned to the wall reads simply, "Trust no one," especially the ones who smile too easily. Charming. He had spies everywhere. Some say entire walls in the palace had hollow panels where eavesdroppers sat quietly for hours, scribbling down treasonous murmurs between bites of dates. He had a habit of reciting people's private conversations back to them, word for word, during official meetings. Surprise, quirky detail. He lined the halls of his home with mirrors specifically so he could see behind himself at all times. Rumor has it, he even had a mirrored ceiling above his bed, not for vanity, but because assassins don't always knock. And yet, beneath all the suspicion, Domitian had a flair for aesthetics. You walk past a courtyard of sculpted trees pruned into perfect spirals. His garden paths spell out Latin phrases when viewed from above. Order is peace. Control is mercy. You think that last one might be carved onto the collarbones of his guards. You pass through a wing dedicated to literature. Domitian prided himself on being a poet and patron of the arts. But of course, he censored every performance, every verse. You had to be loyal even when rhyming, especially when rhyming. The theater under his rule was tightly regulated. Actors who misspoke on stage banished. Poets who joked too openly disappeared. He once executed a man for writing a horoscope. That turned out accurate. Apparently, even stars weren't above suspicion. And still, he was loved, at least by the military. Domitian paid his soldiers well, visited the front lines, and fortified the empire's borders. Many legionaries saw him as a disciplined, competent ruler. They didn't care about the Senate's grumblings. They cared that their boots had solid roads beneath them and coins that didn't crumble in their hands. But the Senate, oh, they hated him, passionately, whispered constantly about treason. Some of those whispers were real. Some weren't. Didn't matter to Domitian. Once he executed his own cousin, based on nothing but a dream. He also banished an entire orchestra because he thought the trumpet sounded too aggressive. You step into one of the palace's meditation chambers, or so it was labeled. Its completely black walls sealing even the floor. In the center is a single candle, and surrounding it are mirrors arranged like the petals of some paranoid flower. You realize it's not a room for thinking. It's a room for watching yourself. Historians still debate what finally tipped him over the edge. Was it age isolation? The realization that even gods die? In his final years, Domitian withdrew from public life more and more. Some say he developed a phobia of lightning. Others say it was people he feared, or perhaps himself. The end when it came was not entirely unexpected, but it was theatrical. You wind your way toward his bedchamber, only to stop just short. You already know what happened there. A freedwoman named Parthenius, one of the few people he trusted, helped orchestrate his assassination. A servant gave the signal. And the emperor, so obsessed with reflections, so vigilant in every room, missed the blade that came from within. A curious echo. He died alone, in the place he thought safest, surrounded by his own face. You turn to leave, but you catch one last glimpse of yourself in the nearest polished panel. Just for a moment, your own eyes look suspicious. You blink. No, it's just the lighting, probably. The boat rocks gently beneath your feet, lapping against the craggy shore of a cliffside retreat. At first glance, it feels like paradise. The sky is cloudless, the sea glimmers, and Capri, this remote island floating off Italy's coast, is peaceful, fragrant with lemon groves and sea salt. But as your boat pulls in, you notice something off. A statue by the dock is missing its eyes. A man carrying grapes stumbles and never looks up. And above, carved into the stone itself, is the sprawling villa of Emperor Tiberius, the reclusive ruler who abandoned the city and turned an island into a labyrinth of luxury, loneliness, and whispers that still shiver through history. You step ashore and begin the climb up narrow switchback paths. You pass terraced gardens, old columns wrapped in vines, and empty pools filled with leaves. The silence isn't comforting. It's loaded like the place itself is holding its breath. By the time you reach the top, the scent of citrus is overpowered by something else. Incense, animal musk, and maybe sweat. Villa Jovis, the house of Jupiter, is carved into the mountain's spine. Tiberius didn't just build a getaway. He built a fortress. 8 levels of stone secret tunnels and panoramic views so he could spot ships long before they arrived. It's not paranoia if you know they're coming. Inside, you find a long hallway tiled with tiny mosaics, wave stars, figures, and prayer. But no emperor. You're told he's in one of his reflection chambers, which, depending on the mood, is either a reading room or an execution site. You tread softly sandals, brushing marble, worn smooth by the pacing of old sandals long gone. Tiberius isn't Caligula. He's not flamboyant. He doesn't demand ovations. He prefers shadows. Still, the stories people tell about him, well, let's start with the real history. Tiberius was a capable general, a reluctant emperor, and the stepson of Augustus, the first true Roman emperor. When he took the throne, he ruled cautiously, even prudently. He didn't empty the treasury. He didn't build gold-plated horse thrones. He actually avoided being in the spotlight. But over time, something shifted. And instead of aging gracefully in Rome, he fled it. He left the city behind and retreated here to Capri, where he ruled from afar. You walk into a room with wide, glassless windows, facing the sea. A slave kneels in the corner, polishing a silver dish that reflects the sun just enough to blind you briefly. When your vision clears, you see nothing. Just an empty chair. Tiberius was known to listen without being seen. He placed listening posts throughout his villa holes and walls ducts that carried whispers from one room to another. Imagine trying to lie in a place where even the marble hears you. You're led to the gardens, where you hear snippets of conversation from servants who think no one is listening. One mutters about a punishment from last week, something about a man who stole wine being flung off a cliff. That's not just poetic license. Tiberius's cliff of execution, known to locals as the Salto di Tiberio, was reportedly used for tossing victims into the sea below, sometimes alive, sometimes already handled by his personal guards. Quirky detail: Tiberius kept a collection of goats. No one's quite sure why. Some say they were symbolic of fertility. Others say they were pets, or possibly part of the more salacious rumors spread by his enemies. Because here's where the line between fact and gossip blurs. Ancient historians, especially Tacitus and Suetonius, accused Tiberius of indulging in every kind of debauchery. They called him a monster, a man who filled his villa with minnows, young boys trained to swim between his legs, and committed atrocities too explicit for bedtime storytelling. And yet, modern historians remain divided. Were these true accounts, or carefully sculpted slander designed to poison his legacy? You find yourself in another chamber, a door, just a veil of thick beads hanging from the arch. Inside, it's quiet. Cushions line the floor. Scrolls, most half-burned, rest in cubbyholes. This was likely his sanctuary. Tiberius, believe it or not, loved Greek literature. He could recite Homer from memory. He debated Stoic philosophy with himself. He once declared that governing was like holding a wolf by the ears, too dangerous to release, too dangerous to keep holding. Outside, the wind picks up, bringing with it a gull's cry and the far-off crash of waves. You lean over a balcony and catch sight of the cliff. It's beautiful, dramatic, terrifying. The kind of place that whispers secrets with every gust of wind. At some point, Tiberius stopped coming back to Rome altogether. He sent letters, orders, executions, but not himself. When political enemies moved against him, he crushed them by proxy. When conspiracies brewed, he sniffed them out with frightening precision. It's said he once executed a man simply for mentioning the name of a previous emperor in a toast. And yet when he died, the transition wasn't clean. Caligula, his great-nephew and successor, was already waiting in the wings, depending on which story you believe. Tiberius died quietly in his bed, or was smothered with a pillow by his own guards to speed up the inevitable. One servant reportedly saw him breathing after the first announcement of his death, and ran to tell everyone, only to be silenced forever. You step into the final courtyard, where lemon trees stretch toward the sun, and the air is briefly sweeter. It's quiet again. Not the charged silence of fear, but something more, resigned. Like the villa itself knows it can't argue with the rumors anymore. Was Tiberius truly a monster, or just a tired man broken by politics, retreating into isolation, while his reputation was torn apart by gossip-hungry historians? Historians still argue. Some say he was misunderstood, a stern ruler, unfairly demonized. Others see in his retreat the birth of the imperial cult of secrecy and surveillance, a blueprint for every paranoid emperor that followed. You pass a bronze statue on your way down the hill. The nose is broken. The plaque simply reads, Caesar Tiberius. No titles, no poetry, just a name. Some emperors wanted glory. He perhaps just wanted to be left alone. Your sandals crunch against sand, not the soft, beachy kind, but desert grit, dry and sharp as ground glass. The sun hangs low over the Egyptian horizon, bleeding orange into the dust-choked sky. You're in Memphis, not Tennessee, but ancient Egypt, newly conquered, forcibly decorated with Persian banners. And looming before you, clad in armor, but glaring like a scorned deity, is Cambyses II, king of kings, pharaoh of pharaohs, and quite possibly one of the angriest men ever to walk the Nile. He's pacing, which is a bad sign. Cambyses doesn't just pace when he's annoyed. He paces when he's about to obliterate something sacred. You shuffle sideways to avoid the line of priests clutching scrolls and goat bones. They're trying very hard not to breathe too loudly. When Cambyses arrived in Egypt around 525 BCE, he came not as a polite tourist, but as a conqueror with a complex. His father, Cyrus the Great, had built the mighty Achaemenid Empire. Big shoes to fill. So Cambyses thought, why not top that by swallowing Egypt whole? He succeeded, but only barely. Egypt didn't take kindly to being bossed around. And Cambyses, well, he didn't take kindly to not being worshipped immediately. Inside a temple courtyard, you catch a glimpse of something uncomfortable, a statue of the sacred Apis bull smashed in half. Cambyses allegedly did that. According to Herodotus, when the Egyptians tried to present him with the Apis, basically a living god in bull form, complete with golden jewelry and VIP stable canvases, laughed, called it superstition, and stabbed the animal in the thigh. Historians still argue whether this really happened. Some say it's propaganda cooked up after his death. Others point to a wave of temple graffiti that doesn't exactly scream fan club. You slide into the shadows of a stone colonnade where noble families once paraded and now soldiers clean sand from their boots. Cambyses has been known to execute people for standing in his shadow. He's moody, unpredictable, and very possibly losing his grip. Let's talk about his family for a moment, particularly his brother Bardia, or Smerdes, depending on which historian you're following. After conquering Egypt, Cambyses received word that Bardia had seized the Persian throne in his absence. Cue dramatic music. Some versions say Bardia was an imposter. Others claim Cambyses had already murdered his brother in secret before the Egypt campaign, and the usurper was just a lookalike. Quirky twist. The man who replaced Bardia was allegedly a Magian priest, pretending to be him. Imagine finding out you lost your empire to a cosplayer. Anyway, Cambyses didn't handle the news well. He jumped on his horse, vowing to return and reclaim his throne. But on the way out of Egypt, he accidentally stabbed himself in the thigh with his own sword. Infection set in. Days later, he was dead. Historians still argue whether it was fate karma or just plain clumsiness. But let's rewind a bit, because before that fatal accident, Cambyses had time to commit a few more unforgettable acts of imperial overreach. You follow the scent of scorched papyrus into the remains of a library wing. Legend says he ordered several temples' burned shrines looted and mummies defiled, acts of sacrilege. So egregious that even his Persian advisors winced. He once sentenced 12 prominent Egyptian nobles to death simply because they hesitated during a ritual. Another time, he buried people alive for questioning his divine status. And yet, there's a strange logic behind the madness. Cambyses was a man surrounded by centuries-old institutions, beliefs, and rituals that didn't make room for him. So instead of adapting, he smashed his way in. You find him now standing at the edge of a canal construction site. The engineers are bowing repeatedly, trying not to mention that the canal designed to connect the Nile to the Red Sea is months behind schedule. Cambyses listens for a few seconds, then turns and walks away. 10 minutes later, the engineers vanish. No one mentions them again, but here's something modern historians wrestle with. Was Cambyses truly insane, or just historically misunderstood? Herodotus, our main source, paints him as a blasphemous lunatic. But Herodotus was Greek, and the Greeks didn't exactly adore the Persians. Some suggest Cambyses was more calculating than he seemed, that his harshness was a strategy to crush Egyptian resistance. Others think the stories were exaggerated after his death by Darius I, who needed to justify why he was seizing power. And Darius really leaned into the Cambyses went bonkers narrative. You trail Cambyses through a half-finished administrative building, long corridors, unpainted columns. A fresco in progress showing the king trampling crocodiles. The artist keeps glancing nervously at the door, probably wondering if Cambyses will come in and decide the colors look too Babylonian. The emperor pauses before the throne. It's Egyptian in design, but draped with Persian symbols, lions, fire altars, wings. He sits slowly, pressing one hand to his bandaged thigh. It's already looking infected. No one dares mention it. Instead, a priest is ushered forward to recite a passage from the Book of the Dead, hoping to curry favor. Cambyses doesn't blink. When the priest finishes, there's a long pause. Then Cambyses chuckles. It's not a warm sound. Why worship the dead, he asks, when the living hold the blade? No one answers. And maybe that's the tragedy. Cambyses came to Egypt as a conqueror, but he tried to rule it like a god without understanding the people, their faith, or the delicate threadwork of their beliefs. When they didn't worship him as pharaoh, he punished them. When they offered their symbols of peace, he treated them like threats. You step out of the chamber and look back one last time. The light catches Cambyses' eyes. They don't glow with madness, not exactly. Just exhaustion, fury, and something lonelier than either. In the end, he left no heirs, no golden legacy, just confusion fire and a trail of broken temples across a sunburned land. You're ankle-deep in mud and surrounded by silence, not the peaceful kind, but the heavy post-battle sort. Even the birds have stopped singing. The ground is littered with broken swords, shattered chariots, and a sandal with no foot inside. The sky above is strangely still. You've just missed one of the bloodiest days in ancient Indian history. Welcome to the aftermath of the Caligula War and the haunted transformation of Ashoka the Great, a Mauryan emperor who began as a ruthless warlord and ended up preaching peace, but not before staining the soil with the lives of over 100,000 people. You trudge past what was once a hilltop citadel, now reduced to rubble and ash. Bodies have been cleared, but the ghosts, they linger. Ashoka, they say, stood here himself, ankle-deep in blood, surveying the cost of victory. He had won. Caligula had fallen. But instead of cheers, he was met with the wails of survivors, the flicker of funeral pyres, and the unshakable feeling that something inside him had broken. That's where your journey begins. Ashoka wasn't always a philosopher king. He earned his early nickname, Chandashoka Ashoka the Cruel, by crushing rebellions and eliminating rivals. One story claims he killed 99 of his own brothers to secure the throne. Historians still argue if that number's a little too dramatic, but let's just say family reunions were probably awkward. You follow a path away from the battlefield toward the imperial camp. The mood there is odd. No victory feasts, no music. Just silence and scribes everywhere writing furiously under torchlight. Ashoka has issued new orders document everything. Every death, every village destroyed, every orphan made. Not to boast, but to remember. You pass a carved slab set upright in the earth. The writing is still fresh, chiseled in the Brahmi script. It's one of Ashoka's first edicts, inscribed not in Sanskrit for the elites, but in local dialects for the common people. The message, a radical shift. Ashoka renounces conquest by war. He commits to conquest by Dhamma, a moral law of compassion, tolerance, and good governance. You blink. This isn't Caligula-style chaos or Nero's musical mania. This is something else, a total philosophical pivot. A blood-drenched king attempting to reprogram an empire. Inside the emperor's tent, incense smolders. A small bronze statue of the Buddha sits surrounded by lotus petals. A monk quietly recites verses. And there's Ashoka himself, barefoot cloaked in simple cotton, staring at a clay bowl of water. He lifts it, pours it slowly into the soil, and says nothing. He's changed, or so he says. But here's the thing, his conversion to Buddhism wasn't instant. Some scholars argue it was a political move, designed to unite a fractured empire with a softer, universal message. Others believe the transformation was real, triggered by trauma. There's no definitive moment, just a gradual public unraveling of the man who once ruled with iron fists and now wants to rule with open palms. Outside, the royal engineers are at work, not building fortresses or weapons, but rest stops. Ashoka begins ordering the construction of trees for shade wells, for water and medical centers for humans and animals. Yes, you heard that right. Ashoka was one of the first rulers in recorded history to mandate healthcare for cows. Quirky detail, he also banned animal sacrifices at court, swapped hunting parties for spiritual retreats, and may have written the ancient world's version of please recycle edicts. We even sent Buddhist missionaries abroad to Sri Lanka, Egypt, and possibly as far as Greece. His idea: if people can't stop killing for territory, maybe they can start listening to each other. You hike to a cliffside now, where a stone lion watches the valley below. This is one of Ashoka's pillars, massive stone columns, each topped with different animals, all bearing inscriptions. They were erected across the empire as public reminders of his Dhamma. Think of them as ancient moral billboards. Be kind, don't lie, respect your parents, and please don't impale anyone today. And here's the twist: it kind of worked. Crime dropped, corruption slowed, trade increased. Ashoka ruled for decades after Caligula without another major war. The empire stretched from modern-day Afghanistan to Bangladesh, and it held together not through fear, but through a shared ideology. But not everyone was impressed. Conservative Brahmins resented the shift toward Buddhism. Military leaders felt sidelined. Some citizens just wanted their old fiery king back. And deep down, you sense Ashoka knew his peace came at a cost. Historians still debate how sincere his remorse truly was. Some say he became a model of ethical rulership, a rare case of absolute power used wisely. Others think he simply swapped weapons for ideology, controlling people not with swords, but sermons. You sit beside a lotus pond as dusk settles over the trees. Somewhere nearby, monks chant. The breeze carries the scent of sandalwood and something older smoke from a distant cremation fire. Ashoka walks past, slower now, older. He doesn't see you. His eyes are turned inward, toward memory, toward consequence. In his final years, he withdrew more and more from court life, delegated more, meditated longer. One story claims he kept a single blood-stained sword in his chamber, not to use, but to remember, a symbol of who he had been. When he died, his empire held but only briefly. Within 50 years, it fractured. The pillars were weathered by time. His name was nearly forgotten, until modern archaeologists found the edicts, the lions, the stones, and realized that long before enlightened rulers became political slogans, there was a man who tried, however imperfectly, to rewrite what rulership could mean. You glance up at the pillar again. The lion atop it stares east into the rising dawn. Not roaring, not pouncing, just watching. Maybe that's the legacy Ashoka wanted. Not fear, not worship, just awareness. There's no moon tonight, only a heavy smothering mist that clings to your robes as you descend into a subterranean tunnel flanked by silent warriors. They don't move, but they watch. Rows upon rows of them, clay hands resting on clay spears, eyes locked in eternal vigil. You've arrived at the tomb of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. And if you think all those terracotta soldiers are dramatic, wait until you see what he built to avoid death itself. The air is cold down here, damp, laced with the faint scent of lacquer and centuries-old ambition. You brush past a chariot wheel and duck under a wooden beam, ducking instinctively as if the emperor himself might appear around the corner. But he's not here. Not exactly. He's buried deeper beneath an artificial mountain sealed with Mercury River's death traps, and possibly enough toxic gas to qualify the entire mausoleum as an OSHA nightmare. But let's rewind. You climb back into the light, soft and gray, and survey the massive complex above ground. The scale is almost comedic. More than 8,000 life-sized warriors, each with different faces, hairstyles, and ranks. Horses, archers, acrobats, even bureaucrats. All molded in painstaking detail, arranged in battle formations to protect an emperor who feared everything, especially death. Qin Shi Huang wasn't born into peace. He inherited a fractured land torn between warring states. But he crushed them one by one and declared himself the first emperor of a new China. Not king, not duke, emperor. Because why stop at conquering geography when you can rename time itself? That's right, he rebooted the calendar, renumbered the years, and even tried to rewrite philosophical history by burning books that contradicted his vision. Confucian texts torch them. Dissenting scholars bury them alive. Quirky detail, he standardized weights measures and even axle lengths, so carts could fit neatly on national roads. That's either genius urban planning or the world's pettiest form of control. You pass a section of the terracotta army still under excavation. Workers whisper. Not because they're superstitious, okay, maybe a little, but because the site is volatile. The emperor's actual tomb, the central chamber, remains unopened. Legend says it's laced with rivers of liquid mercury meant to mimic flowing lakes and oceans. Some scientific scans suggest it might actually be true. And what about traps? Ancient texts claim that crossbows were rigged to fire automatically upon intruders. Whether they'd still function after 2000 years is unclear, but hey, you're not going to be the one to test it. So why all this? Because Qin Shi Huang didn't just want to rule now. He wanted to rule forever. Mortality to him wasn't just a nuisance. It was the enemy. You find his traveling chamber nestled between storage halls. A replica carriage sits beside it, blackened by time. This is where he spent his final days on the road, hunting immortality. Literally. He sent expeditions across the sea in search of the mythical islands of the immortals. One of them, led by a man named Xu Fu, never returned. Maybe they found paradise. Maybe they found sharks. Maybe they just didn't want to come back. Meanwhile, the emperor swallowed mercury pills prepared by court alchemists who swore it would prolong life. Irony alert, it may have been those very pills that killed him. Historians still argue about the cause of death, natural illness, slow poisoning, or something else. But when he died, his court panicked. Afraid of unrest, they hid his death for weeks, keeping his cart sealed while it traveled back to the capital. According to one account, they packed barrels of fish inside to mask the smell of decomposition. You try not to think too hard about that as you glance toward the embalming chamber. But even in death, he left behind a legacy that refused to stay buried. You descend once more into the tomb gallery. The soldiers stand taller here, more detailed. One has a faint smile, another a scar. These aren't mass-produced mannequins. They're stories carved in silence. Protectors, witnesses, and above it all, the Great Wall, or more accurately, the early version of it. Qin Shi Huang ordered the connection and expansion of various regional walls to form a vast barrier against northern tribes. He didn't live to see the final product, but the idea was his. Thousands died building it, peasants, prisoners, conscripts. Some were buried inside its foundations. He believed walls could keep out enemies, and maybe even time. You circle back to the central crypt, still sealed. Archaeologists haven't opened it yet, partly out of respect, mostly out of fear. Mercury levels around it are dangerously high, and no one's quite sure what waits inside. Booby traps, ancient spores. A cosmic lawsuit from the ghost of an emperor who did not give you permission. You stand still, and for a moment you imagine him lying there. Not in decay, but perfectly preserved in jade armor, surrounded by rivers of silver and gold. Not resting, just waiting. Because Qin Shi Huang didn't see death as a destination. He saw it as an obstacle to be conquered. He unified China, built walls, burned books, buried armies, all in service of the ultimate delusion, control over fate. And maybe that's why his mausoleum remains sealed. Not just for safety, but because opening it might feel like losing to him, like giving him what he wanted all along: your attention, your awe, your fear. You take one last look at the warriors lined up in formation. They haven't moved in 2000 years. But you get the sense that if they did, they wouldn't be surprised. A hush falls over the desert plain, broken only by the clink of metal and the soft creak of leather armor. You're standing at the edge of a military camp, not one of a conquering emperor, but a man whose very right to rule has been questioned for over 2,000 years. His name, Darius I of Persia. Or was it you? Step carefully past rows of soldiers sharpening spears and murmuring in Old Persian, ducking under a silk banner emblazoned with the royal lion and sun. At the center of the camp sits a man with a closely cropped beard, wide shoulders, and a look that could crack stone. This is Darius, or the man who claims to be. Because before he became Darius the Great, he was just a royal bodyguard. And yet within a year of Cambyses II's death, this man was emperor of the vast Achaemenid Empire. That's a glow-up worthy of a Netflix limited series. But here's where it gets messy. You follow a corridor of polished stone into the royal tent, where scribes work feverishly drafting a new decree. Darius isn't just a warrior. He's a PR machine. He knows if he wants to rule, he needs a story. A good one. And so begins one of the most debated imperial origin tales in history. He claims the throne was stolen by an impostor, a Magian priest named Gaumata, who pretended to be Cambyses' brother, Bardiya. According to Darius, no one realized the deception because the real Bardiya had already been secretly murdered. By Cambyses, convenient right, quirky twist. This fake Bardiya supposedly ruled peacefully for several months, reducing taxes and gaining public favor. But Darius insists the man was a fraud, and fraud must be punished. So he assembled 6 noblemen, stormed the palace, and assassinated the impostor. That's the official version, according to Darius. You peer at a nearby tablet being carved in real-time stone dust curling into the air. This is the Behistun inscription, a multilingual brag wall Darius had carved into a cliff face, so future generations would know he was the rightful king. It's part epic poem, part legal defense, and part ancient press release. One panel shows Darius triumphantly placing his foot on the chest of the defeated Gaumata. Subtle, not exactly. Historians still argue whether this story is real, embellished, or completely fabricated. Think about it, the only source we have for the imposter theory is Darius himself. No one else mentions it. And he had every reason to justify taking the throne. After all, he wasn't in the royal line of succession. So maybe he killed the real Bardiya. Maybe the usurper was legit. Or maybe the whole thing was a Game of Thrones-style frame job with fancier beards. You wander into Darius's treasury tent. Coins glint under torchlight stamped with his newly minted image. He's already redesigned the currency, reorganized the empire into satrapies' provinces, and implemented a postal system with way stations and horses that would make Amazon jealous. That's the thing about Darius. Regardless of how he got here, once he had the crown, he worked for it. You pass by a map of his planned canal, one that would link the Nile to the Red Sea. He's building bridges, digging tunnels, connecting empires. The man doesn't sleep. Or if he does, it's while dictating edicts in 3 languages. But control has its costs. In one of the outlying tents, a minor revolt is already brewing. Someone in Babylon has declared themselves king. Again. That makes, 4 uprisings this month. Darius squashes them all, stamping each rebellion with military precision and commemorating his victory with more inscriptions. It's like Yelp reviews, but for crushing revolts. You sit beside a stone relief being painted in ochre. It shows Darius standing tall, while 9 captured liars, rebels, and rivals are bound at his feet, each labeled with their name and crime. He didn't just defeat his enemies, he immortalized them. He wanted history to remember who lied, who rose up, and who got wrecked. And yet, for all the pageantry, there's a thin layer of insecurity underneath it all. Why carve your origin story 300 feet up a cliff unless you're really worried someone might question it? Quirky detail. In the Behistun text, Darius refers to himself as a good bowman, a good horseman, a good spearman. That's like putting excellent swimmer on your presidential resume. It's overcompensating. Or maybe he was just that proud of his form. Still, no one can deny his competence. Darius built roads, established law codes, and extended Persian control all the way into the Indus Valley. He fought the Scythians in the north and launched campaigns in Greece, one of which ended with a certain famous marathon. You remember the guy who ran all that way to say we won and then dropped dead? Yeah. That was Darius's fault. But not everything worked out. You visit the temple courtyard where priests are still adjusting to Darius's strong push for Zoroastrianism. The ancient Persian faith centered on the duality of good and evil. Darius promoted it fiercely, elevating Ahura Mazda as the one true god. Some provinces weren't thrilled, others complied. You get the sense that religious tolerance under Darius meant believe what you like, so long as it also aligns with me. You step into the cool of a stone hall, its walls etched with lines of old Persian text. One passage recently carved reads, "What was done by me, all that I did by the will of Ahura Mazda." Which you know is a very convenient way of saying, don't blame me, blame the divine plan. You wonder briefly what it's like to rule with that much uncertainty. To know your legitimacy hinges not just on politics, but on storytelling. Maybe that's why Darius was so obsessed with architecture, with inscriptions, with monuments that would shout louder than his critics. You exit the camp just as the stars come out. Behind you, Darius's tent glows like a beacon. Inside, he's dictating again. Another edict, another record, another line carved into history by the man who may or may not have been a usurper himself. But one thing's clear. Darius understood what many mad or misunderstood rulers never did. Control the story and you control the future. The harbor glows with torchlight, its waters thick with the perfume of crushed lotus and rotting politics. You're in Alexandria, Egypt's crown jewel, the city of scholars, libraries, and absolute royal drama. Tonight you're headed into the palace of the most famous queen in ancient history. But we're not talking about her, not yet. Because before Cleopatra VII became legend, she was just one act in a centuries-long circus of incest, betrayal, and thrones traded like party favors. You're about to meet her co-star, her brother-husband. Yes, buckle up. You cross the palace threshold, white limestone underfoot columns glimmering in moonlight. Somewhere a harp plays, not for ambiance, for tension. Because this isn't just a palace, it's a stage. And the plot, thinly veiled murder mystery, meets awkward family reunion. The year is 48 BCE. Cleopatra is about 21. Her brother Ptolemy III is maybe 13. And thanks to the will of their father Ptolemy XII, who went down in history with the subtle nickname oddities, meaning flute player, and also probably bribed the Romans, they're now co-rulers. And also married. You step into the main hall where mosaics gleam beneath your feet, depictions of the Nile papyrus fields and crocodiles. Lots of crocodiles. One even has a little crown. That's not accidental. The Ptolemaic dynasty, founded after Alexander the Great's general Ptolemy, took over Egypt, had a habit of leaning hard into Egyptian symbolism, even as they stayed culturally Greek. So crocodile gods on the walls, Homer in the library. And then there's the inbreeding. Oh, the inbreeding. By Cleopatra's time, the royal bloodline had looped around itself so many times it practically formed a noose. Brother-sister marriages were standard. Ptolemy II married his sister. So did Ptolemy IV. Ptolemy VI married his sister, and then their daughter married her brother. Historians still debate whether this was strategic or just a catastrophic misunderstanding of genetics. You walk past a set of marble thrones, one gold one, and a slightly shorter silver gilt. The taller is Cleopatra's. She's gone, banished. A civil war is brewing. You follow the noise out into the royal garden where soldiers gather in tense clusters. Cleopatra has fled the palace. Ptolemy XII, with help from his advisors, especially the cunning eunuch Pothinus, has pushed her out, accusing her of trying to take full control. She's now holed up in Syria gathering an army. Not exactly your average sibling squabble. Quirky fact, Cleopatra wasn't just smart, she was brilliant. Spoke at least 9 languages. Studied philosophy, astronomy, medicine. Some accounts suggest she even had a copy of Homer's Iliad annotated in her own handwriting. This wasn't a queen who needed flattery. She needed power. And her brother husband was in the way. You step onto the palace balcony as a strange new ship pulls into the harbor one, bearing the golden eagle of Rome. Uh-oh. Enter Julius Caesar. Fresh from chasing his rival Pompey across the Mediterranean, Caesar arrives in Alexandria expecting a formal welcome. Instead, he receives Pompey's severed head, courtesy of young Ptolemy, who thought this gesture would impress the Roman. It didn't. Caesar was horrified. Killing a Roman consul, especially one he used to call son-in-law, wasn't diplomacy. It was career suicide. The tension in the palace cracks like thunder. Then Cleopatra makes her move. And this is where you stumble into legend. You follow a servant through a narrow hallway into the private quarters. There's a rolled-up carpet leaning against the wall. Someone gestures, and the rug unfurls and out spills Cleopatra in full royal regalia, eyes sharp as obsidian. Whether or not she actually arrived rolled in a carpet is debated. Some say it was a linen sack. Others think the whole thing is Roman exaggeration. But whatever the details, Cleopatra did sneak into Caesar's quarters alone. She made her case, and by morning, Caesar was on her side. You peek into the throne room the next day. Cleopatra sits tall. Beside her, Caesar. Across the room, Ptolemy XXIII, his fuming tears brimming in his adolescent eyes. He's lost. And soon, things spiral. Civil war erupts in Alexandria. You duck arrows in the library district. Flames lick at scrolls. Scholars flee with armfuls of manuscripts. The great library may have been partially destroyed in this conflict. Historians still argue the details. But one thing's clear knowledge. I burned while dynasties crumbled. Ptolemy XIII tries to flee across the Nile. His boat capsizes. The boy king drowns, weighed down by golden armor and terrible decisions. The palace is quiet again, and Cleopatra victorious. But of course, the story doesn't end there. Cleopatra goes on to rule for almost 2 more decades. She has another brother, Ptolemy XIV, whom she also marries, also sidelines, and quite possibly has poisoned when he becomes inconvenient. You wander past the royal nursery where a baby coos from a silver cradle. This is Caesarion, Cleopatra's child, by Julius Caesar. She claims he is Caesar's rightful heir. Rome is not amused. But tonight isn't about Caesar or Mark Antony or that famous asp. Tonight is about the prequel. The twisted, coiled roots of Cleopatra's rise, buried deep in dynastic tradition, family feuds, and a country ruled by people who shared too much DNA and not enough common sense. You step back into the Alexandrian night. The crocodile statues along the walls seem to smile wider now. Not every mad emperor wears madness like a crown. Some rule softly behind eyeliner and incense, moving pawns across a perfumed chessboard. And sometimes, the most dangerous ruler in the room is the one who knows exactly when to wait. The air buzzes with applause, not the polite kind, but the forced, theatrical type you hear when people clap for their lives. You're in Greece, somewhere near Corinth, squinting through the dust of an amphitheater packed to bursting. On stage, a man in a purple cloak holds a golden lyre like it's a weapon. He strums once dramatically. A hush falls over the crowd. His eyes close, his chin tilts upward, and his voice rises in a slow, warbling hymn to Apollo. It is not great. But you clap. Oh, you clap like your life depends on it, because the man crooning on stage isn't just any performer. He's Nero Claudius Caesar, Augustus Germanicus, Emperor of Rome, conqueror of nothing in particular, and self-declared artistic genius. And for the past several months, he's been on a grand cultural tour of Greece, performing in over 1,800 competitions, because one wasn't enough. You nudge your way past a line of sweating nobles, all pretending to be enthralled. One woman is crying. You can't tell if it's from the song or the fear. Nero doesn't just sing. He acts. He dances. He plays multiple instruments, and he wins every time. Because of course he does. Judges who choose anyone else tend to disappear. Historians still argue whether Nero's tour was delusional ego run wild or a calculated performance designed to ingratiate himself with the culturally revered Greeks. He loved them, adored them, saw in their history and drama a mirror for his own greatness. He even delayed imperial business just to stay on schedule with his musical circuit. You exit the theater into a corridor lined with statues, mostly of Nero himself, posed like Apollo lyre in hand robes flowing. One shows him mid-song with a tiny bronze inscription, "To the man who sang as the gods listened." You suppress a snort. Quirky detail he once performed in a play where he played a pregnant woman giving birth. Full costume, full shrieks. One nobleman fainted. No one dared to leave. Seriously, no one. Nero had guards posted at every exit. Walking out before a performance ended was punishable by death. A few spectators faked heart attacks to get out early. Some stuffed wax in their ears to muffle the endless soliloquies. You duck into a shaded courtyard where a group of imperial flatterers, artists, poets, critics, discuss how innovative Nero's vocal phrasing was. One murmurs that the emperor's breath control is supernatural. Another compares him to Orpheus. You're handed a commemorative coin. Nero's face on one side, a lyre on the other. You're told it's legal currency now. Great. But this tour isn't just about art. It's about validation. Nero needs applause like a drowning man needs air. And Greece, with its temples and trophies and golden memory of culture, offers something Rome doesn't approval, without rebellion. At least not yet. He enters the Olympic Games next. You follow a stream of wagons carrying gold-trimmed armor and theatrical props. Yes, even in a sporting event. Nero has decided to compete in every category. Foot races, chariot races, poetry recitals, harp duels. Yes, that's a thing now. He even insists on being awarded the olive wreath before competing. In the chariot race, he enters with 10 horses, which is not only against tradition, but dangerously stupid. During the race, he falls out. Twice, doesn't finish. And yet, he's awarded first place. You glance around. No one even raises an eyebrow. He's declared the victor in every category. Some of the officials announce him as the greatest athlete and artist of all time. Others just mumble into their tunics. When it's time to return to Rome, Nero insists that the sacred Greek prizes the laurel wreaths. Statues' medals be paraded ahead of him in a grand triumph. He sails home with over 1,800 trophies, all earned without question, most unearned entirely. But while he's been soaking in applause, Rome has been unraveling. You pass a courier scribbling furiously into wax tablets. There's news, bad news. In his absence, corruption has flourished. Senators plot behind fans. Generals grow restless. The provinces groan under taxes and Nero's theatrical expenses. One soldier whispers, he sings, we starve. Historians still debate whether Nero understood what was brewing. Was he oblivious, in denial, or simply unwilling to let reality interrupt his artistic vision? You return with the emperor to Italy. His ship pulls into the harbor under a crimson sail. A chorus welcomes him home with song. No cheering crowds, just soldiers, watching. Nero steps onto the dock in full costume. No one claps. You follow him back to his villa, which now houses statues of himself in Greek robes surrounded by muses. He drinks wine mixed with crushed pearls, recites verse about the tragedy of being misunderstood. He thinks people just don't appreciate his artistry. One night, a messenger finally says it. The Senate has turned on him. The army, too. There's no escape. Nero flees into the countryside. You follow cautiously, the world suddenly smaller, less theatrical. He hides in a villa, attended only by a few loyal servants. Dirt smudges his purple cloak. His lyre lies beside him, silent. A soldier approaches. Nero panics. What an artist dies in me, he reportedly cries before ordering a servant to help him fall on his own blade. Was it true madness, or the final act of a man who saw life as one long performance? Historians still can't decide. You walk the quiet corridors of a ruined amphitheater now. Dust drifts over broken stone benches. In the center, a cracked statue of Nero holds a lyre. But his face is missing. You almost hear the applause. Or maybe it's just the wind. There's a glint of gold on the horizon that doesn't belong to the sun. It gleams too brightly, as if the sky itself is being mocked. You're back in Rome or something like it, but nothing feels real anymore. The buildings shimmer with freshly gilded rooftops. Bridges stretch absurdly across rivers where no bridges are needed. And above it all, like a fever dream, astride a throne made of thunderbolts, sits Caligula. Again. Because yes, you've returned. The last time you saw him, he was waging war on the ocean and promoting his horse. You thought that was the peak. You were wrong. That was Caligula light. This is his god phase. You're ushered into a chamber where the walls are plated in gold leaf. Yes, real gold. And every torch flickers with saffron-scented oil. There's a statue of Jupiter in the center. But wait, the face. It's Caligula's. Again. He didn't just compare himself to the gods. He declared himself one. Out loud. To the Senate. Regularly. He had temples built in his name. Priests appointed. Incense burned daily. Worship schedules posted like civic announcements. The Roman elite had to pray to a man who once called the moon his mistress. You walk through a side hallway filled with ivory busts. Every one of them is Caligula in disguise. Caligula as Mars. Caligula as Apollo. Caligula as Venus. Sure, why not? The man had range. Quirky detail. He reportedly demanded that a section of the Temple of Castor and Pollux be repurposed as a personal entrance to the Forum, so he could appear between the gods, like he was one of the trio. He would stroll out mid-senatorial debate flanked by trumpeters glowing with perfume and hubris. You enter the dining hall. The floor is a checkerboard of mother-of-pearl and human panic. Dishes are being served, each shaped like zodiac symbols. A waiter whispers, "Tonight's main course is Leo roasted lion." You don't ask if it's literal. At the far end of the table, Caligula laughs too hard at his own joke. Something about thunder. He once told guests he'd struck Jupiter with lightning for disobedience. The joke didn't land. The guest who failed to laugh hard enough was never seen again. He rises from the table. Silence. The room stills like prey, sensing a predator. He walks barefoot, robes trailing behind him, jewels clinking like wind chimes in a graveyard. And then softly, almost casually, "If I wanted to," he says, "I could have all your throats cut right now." It's a line he uses often. Not in anger, not even in jest. More like a reminder. Historians still argue whether this was genuine madness or a political strategy to keep everyone afraid, and no one will ever move against you. But if it was strategy, it was a dangerous one. Rome didn't take kindly to gods who still needed chamber pots. You follow him to the floating bridge again, this time rebuilt wider, longer. Caligula gallops across it at sunset, wearing golden armor, proclaiming victory over Neptune. Again, only now he claims the sea has surrendered. At the end of the bridge, an altar awaits. It's covered in pearls, coral, and uncomfortably what looks like fish bones arranged into crowns. He performs a ritual. No one knows what it means. He probably doesn't either. But there's incense chanting and a nervous goat painted blue. One servant whispers to you. He asked the moon to marry him last night. You nod slowly. Of course he did. But behind the pageantry, you start noticing the cracks. The guard's armor is scuffed. The temple candles burn low. The roads into the city are emptier than they should be. The people aren't smiling anymore. They're pretending. You enter a Senate chamber expecting politics, and instead find a choir. Senators old and dignified, forced to sing hymns to Caligula twice a week. Some croak through the verses. One nobleman fainted from trying to hit a high note. You look closer. That's not reverence. It's terror. And still Caligula pushes further. He orders the construction of a giant statue of himself, taller than the Colossus of Rhodes, to be erected in the Temple of Jupiter. It's supposed to be animated with machinery that makes the arm raise and the eyes glow red at night. He demands his statue be placed in the Jewish temple in Jerusalem, a move so outrageous that even his own governors begged him to reconsider, fearing full-blown revolt. Miraculously, it doesn't happen. Not because Caligula changed his mind, but because he was murdered first. You follow a group of Praetorian guards now slipping through palace shadows. One of them tightens his grip on a dagger. Another mutters about the emperor's most recent announcement that he plans to make himself a living god, permanently, with daily sacrifices, starting with several senators. It was too much, even for Rome. The assassination isn't glorious, it's messy. They corner him in a hallway. The guards strike, over and over. One blow pierces his jaw, another his chest. He stumbles forward, sputtering not divine, just dying. Historians still debate whether he said anything with his last breath. One source claims he simply looked surprised. The golden god bleeds just like everyone else. You return to the throne room days later. The statues are toppled. The altars are scrubbed. No more incense. No more blue goats. The empire moves on bruised, a little stunned, but breathing again. And yet even now the stories won't die. People still whisper about him. The god who screamed at the moon. The emperor who declared war on the sea. The man who made fear his only language and forced Rome to sing it in harmony. You pass one last statue, half buried, the face broken, the lyre arm missing. A bird's nest has taken residence in the crown. You almost don't recognize him. You walk through ruins now, not palaces, not temples, just remnants. Columns slanted like falling dominoes. Tiles scattered like dice. Time has had its feast. You pass through the skeletal remains of what might have been a throne room or a prison or both. The lines blur when madness and power dance too closely. Because tonight, this is where the journey ends. Not in a burst of violence or a storm of applause, but in this stillness surrounded by the echoes of emperors who ruled like gods, burned like stars, and fell like men. You pause beneath a crumbled archway where lichen creeps over inscriptions in Latin, Greek, Persian, Chinese. Each a different name, each a different madness. But they start to blur, don't they? The golden lyres, the sun gods, the mirrored walls, the war on the sea. All of it starts to feel like the same story told in different costumes. You remember Caligula laughing at Neptune, Nero forcing ovations in Greek theaters, Commodus renaming Rome after himself, Elagabalus twirling in silk while leopards prowled at his banquet. You recall Cambyses stabbing sacred bulls and Qin Shi Huang swallowing mercury like it was eternal youth in a bottle. Tiberius hiding in cliffside villas, Domitian polishing obsidian panels, Caracalla pacing his marble baths, haunted by the ghost of his brother. Ashoka stands out covered in blood, then drowning in remorse, carving his shame into pillars. And Darius, perhaps not mad, but clever enough to write his own truth in stone. And Cleopatra. She played the game so well, you almost forget how close she sat to madness, veiled in perfume and intelligence, sharper than a Roman blade. Historians still argue, of course. That's their job. They debate which emperors were truly insane and which were merely inconvenient to the men who recorded their stories. Were they mad, or were they mirrors? Because absolute power does something strange to the human mind. Strip away all resistance, all limits, all no's. And what's left? You, unfiltered, unchecked, echoing. And that echo grows louder when everyone around you nods, applauds, kneels. Maybe Caligula really believed he was divine. Maybe Nero thought his harp would save Rome. Maybe Qin Shi Huang didn't fear death. He just hated the idea that he couldn't tell it what to do. Madness and empire, twin stars orbiting the same gravitational pull. The desire not just to rule the world, but to make it applaud. You step past a fallen statue. A foot still perfectly carved rests atop a pedestal. The name is worn away. Doesn't matter. They're all the same in the end. Dust and ego. You look up at the sky. It's quiet again. The stars don't know who ruled below them. They don't care who crowned themselves God. But you remember. The laughter echoing off marble. The petals falling from ceilings. The boots on gold bridges. The statue of a horse in the Senate. Not all madness is rage. Sometimes it's just silence in the wrong place. Applause at the wrong time. A banquet served under threat. A god who bleeds. And now it's over. Almost. The path out is gentle sloping down through soft grass as the ruins grow smaller behind you. The night air is cooler now, still. You exhale long and slow, letting the weight of empires slip from your shoulders. The roar of the crowd, the clash of egos, the gold-plated chaos all fading behind a veil of stars. Let the world be quiet again. The ground feels real beneath your feet. Dirt and stone. No marble, no mosaic. Just earth. Just now. You pass a quiet stream, its waters black under the moon. Somewhere nearby, a night bird sings. You imagine what it must have been like to be a servant in those courts, always watching your words, clapping a little too hard, smiling a little too wide. Now finally, your hands can rest. The faces of emperors drift through your mind. Some tragic, some terrifying. Some just children in adult costumes trying to force the world to match their imagination. Maybe that's all power, is the ability to convince others your dreams are real. But here outside the ruins, there's nothing to prove. No throne to defend. Just you, the quiet, and a sky that has seen it all. Take another breath. Longer this time. And if your thoughts linger on the moon, Caligula loved the bridge Nero paraded across the tomb, chin still guards. Let them drift gentle and slow like petals in a breeze. Because tonight's journey is done, and sleep is waiting.